What happens when an elderly woman tries to pay for her essential medicines with coins and is ridiculed and humiliated by an impatient pharmacy clerk? The elderly woman holds back tears as the customers watch her in silence, but no one realizes that the man behind her wearing a black t-shirt is none other than Jackie Chan. The moment he intervenes, the whole pharmacy goes into shock. Before continuing, let us know where you're watching us from, and if you love stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we'll have another incredible narration waiting for you. Dorothy woke up to the soft sound of birds singing near her window. The morning sun was slowly streaming in through the glass, illuminating the small apartment where she had lived alone since her husband Arthur had left. At 76, Dorothy still kept the habit of getting up early. She enjoyed the quiet mornings, the aroma of fresh coffee, and the gentle rocking of her chair in the living room. Her home was modest but cozy. The walls were decorated with old photographs, reminders of a life well lived, now marked by loneliness. Her 10-year-old grandson Lucas was her greatest joy. He lived a few blocks away with his parents, but whenever he could, he would spend the afternoons with her, playing cards or listening to her stories. That morning, however, Dorothy didn't have time to sit and reminisce about the past. She had to go to the pharmacy. A few days earlier, during a routine checkup, the doctor had warned her about her high blood pressure. "Dorothy, you need to take this medicine every day. It's essential for your health." She nodded in agreement, holding the prescription tightly. But there was a problem. Money was tight. Her pension barely covered her rent and bills. She did her best to save money, but prices seemed to rise every month. That morning, Dorothy opened her old ceramic piggy bank. She poured the coins out onto the table and began to count them carefully. 50 cents, $1, $2. Her heart squeezed as she realized she had no bills, just a handful of coins she had collected over the months. It'll be enough. It has to be enough. She picked up a small cloth bag, put the coins inside, and held it against her chest before leaving. Lucas came running through the door. "Grandma, where are you going?" Dorothy smiled and ran her fingers through her grandson's hair. "I'm going to the pharmacy, my love. I need to buy some medicine." Lucas grimaced. "Are you going alone?" Dorothy nodded. "Don't worry, darling, I know the way by heart." But Lucas didn't seem convinced. He hugged his grandmother tightly, pressing his face against her shoulder. "Be careful, Grandma." Dorothy smiled, feeling the warmth of her grandson's small body against hers. "Always." And then, with the little bag pressed against her chest, she walked out the door, unaware of what was about to happen. The pharmacy was on the corner of a busy street, with a big red sign that read, "Unbeatable discounts." Dorothy walked in slowly, the strong smell of medicine mixed with the scent of alcohol gel. There was a queue at the checkout, and she positioned herself at the end, holding her bag tightly. In front of her, young people grabbed energy drinks. Mothers bought diapers, and elderly people like her waited patiently for their prescriptions. Time passed slowly, but Dorothy didn't mind. She knew how to wait. What she didn't know was that that day would test her dignity like never before, and that a stranger in the queue behind her would change everything. Dorothy waited patiently, clutching the small bag to her chest. The pharmacy was full that morning. Young people were taking vitamins, mothers were medicating their children, and older customers like her were waiting in silence for their prescriptions. She wasn't in a hurry. Dorothy had always known how to wait, but someone there had no patience at all. Ethan, the cashier. Dorothy gave him a gentle smile as he approached. "Good morning, son." Ethan didn't reply. He just held out his hand. The prescription. Dorothy carefully opened her bag, took out the paper and handed it over. Ethan barely glanced at the document, typed something into the system and muttered, without even looking her in the eye, "It will cost $23. Dorothy nodded and began to open her purse. It was then that Ethan realized what she was about to do, and let out a loud sigh, making sure everyone around could hear. "Please don't tell me you're going to pay with coins." Dorothy, oblivious to his tone, smiled softly. "Yes, dear, it's all I have." She began to count the coins carefully, arranging them by value on the counter, but before she could finish, Ethan let out a sarcastic laugh and shook his head. "Ah, Mom, have you ever heard of credit cards?" The words echoed through the store. The disdain in Ethan's voice was impossible to ignore. Dorothy felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She tried to ignore him and continued counting the coins, but Ethan hadn't finished. He crossed his arms and laughed provocatively. "Tell me, Mom, what happened? Have you just stepped out of a time machine?" Dorothy blinked in surprise. Ethan continued, "Who still pays cash in 2025, for God's sake? It's the 21st century, and there are still people who haven't learned to use cards." The humiliation was cutting. Dorothy lowered her eyes to the coins, feeling the shame squeeze her chest. The people around her were paying attention, and she felt the first knot forming in her throat. Ethan didn't stop. He was enjoying himself. He looked at the customers in the queue and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Seriously, can someone explain to Grandma how credit cards work? Maybe she still thinks people use checks." Some laughed discreetly. Dorothy felt her face burn. She wanted to say something. She wanted to explain that her pension barely covered her expenses. She wanted to tell them that she had collected those coins one by one, that every penny was the fruit of a lot of effort. But nothing came out, because deep down she knew that no one wanted to listen to her explanations. A heavy silence hung over the pharmacy. The reactions around her didn't take long. Some looked away, uncomfortable, reluctant to intervene. Others smiled slightly, finding the scene amusing. A well-dressed woman with a designer handbag in her hand whispered to her husband, "This can't be real. Who still pays like that?" Another customer shook his head impatiently. Dorothy felt her heart race. The fear of humiliation squeezed her chest. She tried to keep counting the coins, but her hands were shaking so badly that some slipped out of her fingers and fell to the floor. The sound of the coins falling seemed louder than it really was, and it was enough for Ethan to burst into laughter. Seriously, this is turning into a circus. Dorothy felt tears sting her eyes. She couldn't cry there, but her heart ached. Then a deep, firm voice echoed through the pharmacy. "Enough!" The whole pharmacy fell silent. The laughter stopped. All eyes turned to the man who had just spoken. A tall man in a black jacket and sunglasses stepped forward. His posture was calm but imposing, and his voice was not a request but a warning. Ethan frowned, surprised by the interruption. He let out a dry laugh, crossing his arms. "And who are you to say that?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slowly took off his sunglasses, revealing firm, determined eyes. Someone in the queue whispered, "He looks familiar." Dorothy looked at the stranger next to her, confused. She didn't know who he was, but for some reason, her heart felt a little lighter. Finally, someone was standing up for her. And then a calm, deep voice rang out again in the pharmacy, silencing everyone. "Enough!" Silence hung in the air. All eyes were fixed on the man in the black jacket and sunglasses. His voice had cut through the humiliation like a blade. Dorothy blinked in surprise. Ethan frowned, trying to disguise his discomfort, but he didn't like being challenged. He let out a dry laugh, crossing his arms. "Oh, and who do you think you are to tell me what to do?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked calmly at Ethan, with an expression that conveyed authority. Someone in the queue whispered quietly, "He looks familiar." Dorothy looked at him again, still not understanding what was going on, but for the first time that day, she didn't feel alone. Ethan looked around, noticing that the attention was no longer on him, and this bothered him deeply. He turned to Dorothy, determined to regain control of the situation. Ma'am, honestly, I don't have all day to count coins. Dorothy felt the words go through her chest like a knife, but he wasn't finished. If you don't have any real money, why are you here? Maybe you should ask the government for help, not me. The humiliation intensified. Dorothy couldn't speak. Her eyes glistened with tears, and her chest felt tight. She tried to contain her emotions, but Ethan hadn't finished yet. He picked up the coins she had placed on the counter, holding them as if they were dirty. Or rather, maybe she should try another pharmacy, one that still accepts medieval payments. A few low chuckles echoed among the customers. Dorothy felt the shame consume her. Dorothy wanted to disappear, but before she could do anything, the man next to her finally acted. He stepped forward, reducing the distance between him and the counter. The energy in the pharmacy changed instantly. His tone was calm, but his words carried undeniable weight. You think talking to an old lady like that makes you important? Ethan blinked, surprised. The man kept his gaze fixed on him, unwavering, and the whole pharmacy seemed to hold its breath. Because to me, you look like a spoiled brat who's never learned what respect means. Ethan's face turned red. He tried to laugh again, but now his eyes didn't show arrogance, just discomfort. Look, I'm just doing my job. She's holding up the line. The man smiled slightly. Since when does your job include humiliating customers? Ethan swallowed. He realized that no one was laughing anymore. People were no longer on his side. Dorothy looked at the man, flooded with emotion. For so long, she had learned to put up with this kind of treatment, but now someone was standing up for her, and she had no idea who it was. The man turned to Dorothy with a gentle smile. How much longer? Dorothy hesitated, embarrassed. She lowered her eyes to the coins scattered on the counter. Almost $5. The man reached into his pocket and without hesitation placed a $100 bill on the counter. Ethan tensed, and a murmur spread through the pharmacy. That should be enough, right? Said the man without taking his eyes off Dorothy. She sighed softly, shocked. I can't accept that. The man took her hands gently. You've done enough for the others. Now it's our turn. Dorothy couldn't hold back her tears. The pharmacy fell completely silent. Everyone was now looking at Ethan. He swallowed, realizing that he was completely cornered. Then a voice broke the silence. Wait a minute. I know that guy. Everyone turned to the customer who had shouted, It's Jackie Chan. A shockwave ran through the store. A customer dropped his shopping bag. A woman picked up her cell phone and started recording. Ethan's face lost color. Dorothy blinked, confused. The man smiled at her. Jackie Chan. Dorothy could hardly believe it. She had heard the name before, but now, looking at the man who had just defended her, she didn't know what to say. And Ethan? Ethan felt his world crumble. The pharmacy was now completely against him, and for the first time, he realized that he had made the biggest mistake of his life. Jackie Chan, stammered Ethan, his eyes wide. Suddenly, the whole game had changed. The pharmacy was in shock. The name Jackie Chan seemed to hang in the air. A woman dropped her cell phone on the counter, her hands shaking as she tried to record. A young man looked at his friend with his mouth open. It can't be. Is it really him? Ethan felt sweat trickle down the back of his neck. He didn't know what to say. After all, he had just humiliated an old woman in front of Jackie Chan. But instead of apologizing, he decided to insist. Oh, come on. He forced a laugh, trying to disguise his nervousness. This has to be a joke. Jackie kept her gaze fixed on him. Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine, because that look wasn't that of a Hollywood star. It was that of a man who didn't tolerate injustice. Dorothy was still trying to come to terms with what was happening. She looked at Jackie, then at Ethan, and then at the customers, who were now staring at the cashier with pure contempt. She had never seen a place so silent. Jackie crossed her arms, tilting her head slightly. "Is this how you treat your customers?" Her voice was calm, but it carried immense weight. Ethan let out a nervous laugh. "Look, buddy, I was just joking. It was nothing serious." Jackie raised an eyebrow. "Joking?" He looked around at Dorothy, who was still holding her coins with trembling hands, and at the customers, who were now whispering among themselves, indignant. "Did anyone find that funny?" The silence was absolute. Ethan tried to keep smiling, but his throat was dry. He knew he had lost control of the situation. Jackie took another step forward, resting her hands on the counter. "Let me ask you something, kid." The air in the pharmacy seemed heavier. Ethan swallowed. Jackie continued, "If this lady was your grandmother, would you talk to her like that?" Ethan shuddered slightly. He tried to say something, but the words wouldn't come out, because, deep down, he knew the answer. No, he would never talk to his own grandmother like that. He looked away and stared at the ground. "I was just following store policy." Jackie let out an incredulous laugh. "Oh, right. The policy that says you should humiliate elderly customers in front of everyone." Ethan clenched his fists. He wanted to argue, but how could he? Everyone had seen him, everyone had heard him, and now everyone would know, because he knew the cameras were recording it. Jackie picked up the change from the counter and handed it to Dorothy. She held the notes with trembling hands. Jackie smiled at her. "It's all sorted, darling. You can go home without worrying." Dorothy couldn't hold back her tears. They were no longer tears of shame, but of gratitude. She looked at Jackie and whispered, "Thank you so much. Thank you so much." Jackie took her hand gently. "You don't have to say thank you. Respect should be the norm." Dorothy agreed, overwhelmed by emotion. But before she left, she looked at Ethan and said something no one expected. "Everyone has bad days, son, but you still have time to get better." Ethan's eyes widened. He expected anger. He expected shouting, but all he got was understanding, and it hit him in a way he wasn't prepared for. When Dorothy left, Jackie turned to Ethan. He took out his wallet and put more money on the counter. "This is for the medicine." Then he looked at the pharmacy manager, who had been watching the whole thing paralyzed. "And this guy," he pointed at Ethan, "is the kind of employee who represents your business." The manager swallowed. Ethan felt his stomach churn, because now it wasn't just one customer who was judging him. It was the whole world. It was then that a customer picked up his cell phone and said out loud, "It's already going viral, over 50,000 views in less than 10 minutes. Ethan felt his heart stop. Jackie just smiled slightly. "I think you're going to need a new job." The pharmacy erupted in murmurs. The manager gestured for Ethan to follow him to the back of the store, and everyone knew what was coming. Ethan's arrogance had come to an end, and then Ethan heard the words he never expected. "We need to talk in the office, right now." Ethan swallowed. The words he never expected to hear were still echoing in his mind. "We need to talk in the office, right now." The pharmacy manager, a man with gray hair and a stern look, gestured for him to follow. Ethan felt a knot in his stomach. He looked around for a way out, but there was nowhere to run. The customers were still watching him, many with their cell phones in their hands, recording every step he took. Jackie Chan remained silent, watching with a calm but firm expression. Dorothy, who was still outside, wiped away her tears while an employee gently helped her, and Ethan walked towards what seemed to be his final sentence. When he entered the office, the air seemed to get heavier. The manager closed the door behind him and let out a deep sigh. "What the hell were you thinking?" Ethan tried to open his mouth to defend himself, but there was no defense. The manager took out his cell phone, turned the screen to Ethan and pressed play. Ethan felt his stomach lurch. The video of Dorothy's humiliation already had hundreds of thousands of views. Angry comments flooded the screen. This employee should be fired immediately. Disgusting! I won't shop at this pharmacy anymore if he stays there. Someone give Jackie Chan a prize, please. And then came the worst. The manager's phone rang urgently. He put it on speaker. It's the owner of the company. This employee needs to be fired by the end of the day. He's damaging our image. The manager agreed. Ethan felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Ethan, said the manager with a firm tone, you're fired. The words hit like a direct punch. And for the first time, Ethan felt what it was like to be publicly humiliated. The silence outside the office was deafening. Ethan opened the door slowly, his face completely pale. He saw the customers who were still waiting, many staring at him, some whispering, others just recording his departure. His uniform, which had once given him power over the customers, now seemed like a cruel joke. He picked up his things in silence. The manager said nothing more. The employees avoided eye contact. And then, the worst. Before he left, he saw that Dorothy was still outside with the bag of medicines in her hand. Her eyes were still moist, but now there was something else in them, compassion. Ethan couldn't bear it. He looked away and left the pharmacy as quickly as he could. He didn't want to hear any more. But before he could disappear down the sidewalk, a voice called out to him. And it wasn't just any voice, it was Jackie Chan's. "Hey, kid!" Ethan stopped. His heart raced. He slowly turned around and saw Jackie Chan walking towards him. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. Jackie stopped right in front of him. He didn't look angry, but his gaze was still firm. "What have you learned from all this?" Ethan didn't know what to say. He looked around, embarrassed. The cameras were still rolling. He ran his hands over his face, took a deep breath, and for the first time lowered his head. "I was an idiot," Jackie agreed slightly. "Yes, you were." Ethan felt the weight of those words. But then Jackie put a hand on his shoulder and said something no one expected. "But everyone has the chance to change." Ethan looked up, confused. He expected anger, he expected contempt, but all he got was an opportunity to make things right. Over the next few days, Ethan discovered a new reality. At the community shelter, he worked hard, organizing donations, serving meals, and talking to people who had much less than him, but still managed to smile. Little by little, Ethan began to realize that the respect he never had for others wasn't about money or status, but about empathy. It was about seeing the world through the eyes of others. And for the first time in his life, he felt he was doing something that really mattered. One afternoon, while organizing boxes of clothes at the shelter, he heard someone call his name. "Ethan." He turned around, surprised. There, in the doorway, was Dorothy. She held a small shopping bag and a warm smile. Ethan was paralyzed. He didn't know what to say. Dorothy approached him and held out the bag. "I've brought you some bread and cakes. They said you needed more food for breakfast." Ethan took the bag, still speechless. "Dorothy, what are you doing here?" She smiled gently. "I've been a volunteer here for years. I was surprised when they mentioned a new young man helping out, but now I understand." She looked deeply into his eyes. Ethan looked away, still ashamed of what he had done, but Dorothy put a gentle hand on his arm. "You chose to change, and that's what really matters." Ethan felt a lump in his throat because for the first time he realized that forgiveness is not something you ask for, but something you earn. And there, in front of Dorothy, he realized that perhaps he was finally on the right path. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Dorothy arrived home earlier than usual. Jackie Chan had promised a visit, and she still didn't know what to expect. It wasn't long before a sleek black SUV pulled up in front of her house. Dorothy opened the door and saw Jackie getting out of the car, a large envelope in his hands. Lucas, who had been playing outside, ran over excitedly when he saw him. Grandma, it's the guy from Rush Hour. Jackie laughed, ruffling the boy's hair. Dorothy, still confused, looked at him. What are you up to, darling? Jackie smiled and handed over the envelope. Dorothy, you've spent your whole life helping others. You raised your family, looked after your grandson, and even when you were mistreated, you chose kindness. The world needs more people like you. Dorothy held the envelope with trembling hands. When she opened it, her eyes filled with tears. Inside was an official document. Jackie explained, "This is a scholarship fund for Lucas. He'll never have to worry about school or university. Everything is covered, and you won't have to worry about medicine or expenses anymore. I wanted to do this because people like you deserve all the recognition in the world." Dorothy covered her mouth in emotion. She looked at Lucas, who didn't quite understand what was going on, but smiled all the same, feeling the joy in the air. Then she turned to Jackie and, without saying a word, hugged him tightly. Jackie returned the hug, feeling the warmth of genuine gratitude. And for a moment, the world seemed a better place. That same evening, as Jackie prepared to leave, Dorothy looked at Lucas and smiled. "Darling, do you remember the day I went to the pharmacy?" Lucas agreed. "Yes, Grandma. That guy was very mean to you." Dorothy sighed. "Yes, but thanks to that moment, all this happened, and most importantly, it gave someone the chance to change." Lucas frowned. "The cashier?" Dorothy smiled. "Yes, everyone can learn to be better. Sometimes they just need a second chance." Lucas thought for a moment and then smiled mischievously, like in Jackie Chan movies, when the villain starts out bad, but then gets good. Jackie laughed. "I think I like that comparison." Dorothy took Lucas's hand. "What really matters, my love, is that goodness always finds a way to come back to us, always." And that afternoon, as the sun was setting, Dorothy realized that her life would never be the same. Because, at the end of the day, true wealth is not in money, but in the kindness we share with the world. That was Dorothy's emotional journey and the transformative impact that Jackie Chan's kindness had not only on her life, but on Ethan's too. But now, I want to know, what did you think of this story? Do you believe that small gestures of empathy and compassion can really change the world? Leave your opinion in the comments. I'd love to know what you think. And if this story has touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone you think needs to hear this message of hope and transformation. Oh, and if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, don't waste any time. Click on the subscribe button and activate the bell to receive notifications of more stories that show the power of kindness, resilience, and second chances. Want to be inspired even more? Then don't leave just yet. Click on one of the videos that appear on the screen to watch another moving narration that will touch your heart and remind you of what really matters in life. See you in the next video, with more stories that will make you believe in the best of humanity. See you then.